Okay, so thank you again for having me here. I just wanted to kind of take a moment to introduce myself and my work with iPen. I work with a small business called Social Change Consulting, and we work with small and mid-sized nonprofit organizations and help support their website management, graphic design, digital communications. And with that, that includes email newsletters, video management, and social media. And we've worked with iPen since last summer and are just kind of here to provide a little extra support on updating the iPen website, kind of designing some reports and materials for upcoming events, and also supporting the organization with social media. So Charles asked if I could kind of present for this social media presentation. And I know everyone on this call has different types of needs and campaigns that you're going to be working on. And so to try to capture the variety of activities and needs, I was going to sort of discuss two types of social media engagement. The first is, social media posts, building your audience and helping to promote the activity that you're having. The second part of it is knowing that some of you may be holding events over social media, kind of using Facebook Live, Instagram Live, or YouTube to have a live event. And so we're also going to talk about that a little bit, how to ensure that you have a smooth event and how to promote those over social media as well. For most of the slides, I'm going to try and share content that is relevant to both groups and all types of activities that you may be having. Another note, just kind of at the beginning, is throughout the training, there may be a few times where I say, oh, you can do this. But if you have time, it's great if you also do this as well. I tried to structure sort of advice in that way because I know that you all have a variety of supports and limited time. I work with small organizations and know that there are some times where it's just one or two people working on an event or working on a campaign, and know how limited time is. So I'll also point that out as we go. This is something that's great to do. However, if you don't have time, that's okay. As we mentioned at the beginning, we're going to have questions and answers at the end of the training. If you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat, kind of based on how the presentation is set up. I can't actually see those while I'm sharing the presentation screen. So we'll go through them at the end and kind of refer back to it. And at the end, we can also do questions over kind of video or audio as well. So the other aspect of this training and introductions is I thought it would be helpful to mention just a little bit in terms of my background. I'm an American who lives outside of the United States. I moved to London, England in April, and before that I lived in Berlin, Germany for 3 years. I'm mentioning kind of that at this point because our training is primarily focused on some of the larger social media companies. I know a lot of them are sort of American companies and sort of these large conglomerates of, Meta owns Facebook and Instagram and Threads. And so while many of these platforms are widely adopted, I know there are also smaller social media networks in some countries and regions. And so for the sake of this training, we're going to talk about sort of some of the best practices for using these larger ones, knowing that that can also be helpful for other platforms as well. I know that folks on this also use WhatsApp and WeChat and TikTok, maybe even some folks kind of use Pinterest or Weibo. Each of these platforms kind of vary in how they're used. And we will, I think the information that we share about the larger platforms will be helpful if you additionally use some of the additional platforms that aren't listed in this. So each of the platforms here are used differently and have a different type of audience for them. I'm going to give sort of just a very quick overview in case you were in case anyone on this call is kind of very familiar with one platform, but may not be as familiar with other platforms that are on here, I'm just going to do a quick overview of them. So Facebook is kind of the largest and the broadest social network. The audience for Facebook these days tends to be a little bit older. Younger people are using other social media platforms more often. And then organizations will post updates to Facebook. And a lot of people use Facebook for groups and events. So the platform makes it easy to sort of create or join groups that are based on shared interests or hobbies or communities or kind of political causes and organizations. They have an integrated messaging app within Facebook. It's similar to WhatsApp. At some point, all of it may merge because the company that owns Facebook also owns WhatsApp. And in addition, they also own Instagram. Instagram is far more visual. It's kind of centered around photos and short videos. There's a feature within Instagram, which is called Instagram Stories. It's also pretty popular for sharing content. And those are individual posts that disappear after 24 hours. So I think the idea behind it is to kind of keep folks engaged on the platform and viewing those as well. Hashtags are far more prominent on Instagram than some of the other social media platforms. And Instagram users rely on hashtags to kind of help discover information or to categorize content. So you'll see, especially around some of the big events that are happening, that there may be, some different hashtags that are used for specific events or kind of specific things related to some of the plastics works that your organizations may be doing. Adding hashtags to posts is a helpful way to kind of grow your audience, as people may be searching for things related to that hashtag and may then kind of come across your posts. Twitter/X is used primarily to kind of share news or real-time updates for events that are happening. It has a much smaller character count for social media posts, and users can like or share content more easily on Twitter. It's easier to kind of share or comment on Twitter posts than it is to kind of share content on some of the other social media platforms. Similar to Instagram, hashtags are used on Twitter to help discover content. In some places, Twitter usage is decreasing over the last year or so, as for those that kind of follow social media news, the platform is a bit different, and some folks are having a less than positive experience on Twitter. So that is decreasing a little bit. It may not be in terms of in the communities that you work. Twitter may be a platform, or X may be a platform that folks are still using, but just sort of wanted to share that. Threads, which is the kind of the swirly one here, maybe new to you. It is a new platform that just launched from Facebook and Instagram's parent company, Meta. It's essentially trying to replace Twitter. I don't know if it's going to grow. My suggestion for you all is to not don't invest much time in it unless you go on there and see that there's lots of folks that you work with in your community that are on Threads. I don't think that it is growing much, and it's also not available in some countries yet. LinkedIn is a lot different than the other ones we've mentioned. It's used primarily for professional networking and building business relationships. A lot of folks use it to sort of look for jobs or to connect with people who are in similar jobs. And then finally, YouTube is focused on video content. It's less of a social media network, but I did include it here because I know some folks may be hosting live events on YouTube as part of their program. So Okay, so wanted to talk about kind of graphics and how graphics can sort of help your social media planning and events. So, as I mentioned, graphics are necessary for some social media platforms, especially Instagram. When you are designing any sort of image to help support the event that you're having, something to think about is sort of the readability and functionality of the post. So, is the text legible for individuals who may be scrolling through their phone? If someone is only going to be looking at the kind of this for a minute as they're scrolling on their phone or kind of scrolling through on their computer, um, where do you want their eyes to go on the graphic? What do you want them to see? And what do you want them to do with the information that you're sharing? I highlighted these sort of two images here because the design on the left shares information in a format that is sort of you can quickly sort of see what it is and what it is for. So as you kind of go across, as your eyes kind of look at the graphic, you can kind of quickly see that it's a webinar, when it's happening, and sort of the link to register. The design on the right is much harder to read as there's text that's in white and the background doesn't sort of contrast enough so that you can easily read it, especially when you're looking at it on a phone. And so for any graphics that you're creating to help support the programs that you're doing, highly recommend that when you're creating those graphics, you ensure that the graphic kind of explains what the program is, what you're trying to do, and kind of ask that question of like, what do you want the person who is looking at this to immediately get, whether it's to sign up for an event that's happening, whether it's to sort of share that something, a press release has come out, and you want them to kind of share this information. What is the action that you want them to take? And then also just ensuring that it is something that can be easily read by folks. I the kind of contrast, and I highlighted this one not as a criticism to the person who designed it, but just because when I was going through social media, I will say I'm in my 40s. I'm reaching that point in which when I'm looking at a social media post and I look at something and kind of have that like, oh, okay, what does that say? My eyesight is not as great as it used to be, and so having if somebody sees something and they can't immediately read it, they may think, okay, I can't read this, and kind of just scroll past it on social media, and you've missed your opportunity to engage with them. It's important when thinking about the social media graphic that you're creating to also know you don't have to share everything in the graphic itself. You don't have to share all the text and an explanation of what the webinar is and all the topics that it's going to go through. The goal is to grab the attention of the person who's looking at it, share the key details, and if they want more information about it, then they can then read it in the post themselves, or if you're directing them to a web page, they can learn more information about that from the kind of website that you are sending them to. Okay. So another note about creating graphics to help support the programs and activities that you are working on is to look at the size of the graphics itself. So one of the frustrating things about creating graphics is that each of the social media platforms optimizes a different size. So for instance, Instagram, the ideal size is 1080 pixels by 1080 pixels. It's a square format. Twitter is more of a rectangle, 1600 by 900. And Facebook, which isn't on here, is somewhere in between. At the end of the presentation, there is a slide with a link to iPen communication tools. And so this is a document that just has additional tools and just information that may be helpful for you within that slide, within that document. There is a link to from a group called Sprout Social that has a list of all the social media image sizes and kind of what's best for each social media platform. The reason that I'm kind of sharing information about this in terms of creating these graphics is that when you're creating them to support your social media posts, if you have the time and resources to customize the size of the graphic for each platform, it's great to do that. There's two reasons for this. The first is that there's an assumption, maybe that's not the right word. Each social media post incorporates the size of the images for the posts into sort of the algorithm or the equation that they use to know kind of which, which posts to show when people are using the platform. So I'm just going to dive into, just for a quick moment, some kind of details about the social media platforms. Each of them use an algorithm to determine what you see in your social media feeds. If you follow 500 accounts on Twitter or on Instagram or on Facebook, you're not going to see everything that those 500 accounts shares. The platforms develop a sort of equation based on things like how often do you look at posts from this? How often do you engage with them? How often are other people engaging with this post? And it's an equation they use to kind of try to help keep people on the social media platforms and show them the things that are most interesting to them or the most compelling. The challenge is only the people who work at Facebook and Twitter and Instagram really know how these algorithms work. And so those of us who are posting on social media just try for the best. And sometimes people test things to see, okay, do my posts show up more often when I do this or when I do this? And some companies have tested, they've used Twitter and have posted square graphics or the graphics that are sized for Twitter, and have seen that it looks like Twitter promotes the ones that are the sized for Twitter more often than the ones that are sized for a different platform. So again, if you have time and can create graphics to kind of support your social media and size them for different platforms, that can be helpful. The other reason that's helpful is those two graphics from before for iPen. The one on the left, you can see if somebody was on iPen's Instagram feed, the graphic about the event is square. It's easy to see. You can kind of see what everything is. The one on the right, which is the more rectangle one, you can't as easily see it. The image isn't kind of catered to the platform. If you're on Instagram itself, you would see as you scroll through, you would see the whole thing, but on the specific feed, it doesn't look as visually helpful. So when thinking about the different, I realize it may be complicated, especially with the fact that the social media platforms all use different sizes as their sort of optimal size. If it's something that's only helpful if you have the time and the resources to do so. If there's, like a communications person that you work with or an intern that kind of likes doing stuff like this and can change a social media graphic from one size to the other, that's great. However, if you don't really use Twitter and only have 10 followers, it doesn't make sense to take the time to create a graphic that's specifically for Twitter or specifically sized for Instagram if you don't have much of a following there and don't have the time to do that. If you do have the time and if you have large audiences on these platforms, it can be helpful to make the adjustments for each of them. Okay. Tagging your partners. One of the best ways to help build community and increase the reach for the kind of plastics campaigns and events that you're having is to tag partners into the posts. This means you're mentioning them specifically in the post and linking to their account. This makes it easier for either the organization or if it's an individual speaker to then share the content on their social media, and this helps create organic growth. I also recommend, if you have time, to take a minute to just double check that you are linking to the correct social media accounts. I know there are times in which an organization creates, kind of created a Instagram accounts and then stopped using it and then started using it again, but was locked out for the password. So they created a new Instagram account and the old one is still there, but no one can get into it. That happens sometimes. And if you search for them, you may think, oh, it's the right logo, it's the right one. If you have time, take a look at their website. And if you're working with another organization on a project, just kind of click directly on their social media links so you make sure you're tagging the right one. Something that I've done when working on projects and on events, especially if I know I'm going to be posting about the events multiple times, is that I'll often create a document that just has the name of the organization and then what their Facebook handle is, what their Twitter handle is, what their Instagram account is. And, some may not be on one of the platforms, but if I'm working with 4 other organizations on an event, I'll have this so that I can just refer back to it so that when I'm doing a post on Twitter, I'm just kind of copying and pasting and making sure that I'm tagging the right organization, or if it's an individual speaker each time. Something that may be helpful if you are if you have individual speakers who are taking part of a live event that you are happening and you're promoting it ahead of time, it's also sometimes best to ask them if they want to if they want this post to be shared on social media with their social media handle. Some people may only use social, they may have an Instagram account, but they only really use it for friends and family and don't use it in a professional sense. And so it's sometimes good if you're working with, individuals who are presenting as part of an event that you're kind of a live social media event that you're having as part of a campaign, just to check with them and say, as we're getting ready for the event, we're going to be posting on social media. Do you want me to kind of tag you or your organization on social media and kind of check with them? So if it also, sorry, kind of lost my notes here. Okay, so the other thing that comes up sometimes, and you may have experienced this with your organization, is there are times in which folks are having an event or doing an activity that they want to share with other people, and so they may tag your organization. That isn't always the best thing to do unless the organization is a part of the program. So it's better to, if you want to share it with other folks, is to reach out to them directly as opposed to tagging them in a social media post. That may lead to some confusion on their end if they're not kind of involved with the program itself. And so something that you can do to kind of help folks on social media for this is to create a toolkit to help them share information. So this example that I'm using, I apologize, is it's kind of outside of the IPEN universe, but I thought it might be helpful. It's for an arts organization in the United States. And so this is a couple different screenshots. This is all on one web page, but it's a couple different screenshots from a page in which people can download graphics to share, copy and paste content for social media. And then there's also a section with just some important links and dates and social media account handles in case the organization needs it. And so how something like this would be used is that you could set up a toolkit with information about the program or the event that you are having, and have some sample graphics that people could share, and then have social media content or even an email newsletter content perhaps that other organizations could share to help promote your events. The nice thing about this is that you're making it easy for them. They can just kind of go in and copy and paste and kind of edit the content. If you're including graphics, it makes it easier for them to sort of download the graphic and just know that they have it and can post about it immediately. And so for a toolkit like this, it's best to include graphics, if possible, of a couple different sizes based on kind of whatever social media platform they may use. Social media content with the appropriate links and something that they can copy and paste. And maybe sometimes when I've done something like this in the past, or when other people have shared a toolkit with me for an event or a program or an activity that they're having, sometimes they'll include a paragraph at the top that's just explaining it as a reminder of, hey, we are, before the next plastics treaty meeting, we are having this event to talk about this issue. Thank you so much for sharing this content. Please let us know if you have any questions, and have the person's email address there. Just one thing to note in terms of writing social media content for other people, it's pretty easy because you can take something that you've written and just sort of adapt it and kind of change it from, just sort of change it. So instead of referring to we're sharing, if you post on social media, you may say like, we are sharing this press release, and instead you can just refer to yourself as the organization and say, IPEN is sharing this press release. And so that's, just sort of a way to adapt the work that you're already doing and try to make it easier for other individuals to share. Another way to help promote your events is to use video. Most of the social media platforms are increasing their use of video and are emphasizing video more in what they show on people's platforms. If you are comfortable on camera, it's great to record a short video and kind of go through all the key points. A short video is ideally 30 to 60 seconds. If you want to do a longer video that's more in depth, you can definitely do that. That may be better for YouTube, but then linking to YouTube. For social media, it's helpful to do a little bit shorter, just to help keep people's attention spans on social media. So for a press release, or if you're doing a very targeted campaign, you just kind of go through and on the video, explain what is the press release or campaign, when is it being released, why is it important, how can people take action to support your work. For an event, it's just kind of going through who you are, what the event is about, when the event is happening, why the issue is important, and also why it's important that people attend or what they may get from attending it. I think sometimes for a video, it's difficult to kind of find a balance between sharing information and educating the viewer about something they may not be familiar with, or trying to get the viewer to take action on kind of the topic that the video is about. And so before you make a video, kind of think about what you're trying to do. Is it more trying to educate any followers on, hey, this is a major issue that we're tackling. This is something that's happening in our community, and we want you to know about it? Or is it this issue is happening, we need your help. Come to this event, get your organization involved, participate in this activity and share it with others. So I think before you do a video, kind of think about, is it to educate, or is it to encourage people to take part in some way? Okay, so the next few slides are going to center a little bit more around events and online activities. I know that not everyone as part of their campaign is doing a live event that's going to be broadcast on social media. But I know that some folks are. So I wanted to share a few recommendations. I'll move through this quickly, but just even if you're not having sort of a live event, this may be helpful information for future work. So staffing and support during the event itself. Again, this is going to be another kind of, if you have the capacity, it is helpful to have one person whose job it is to sort of manage the chat. This person can answer questions or link to what is being discussed during the program itself. So this is especially helpful for live events that are happening because some folks may get there late. Some people may be on social media and get a notification that says, like, this organization is doing a live event. Do you want to join? And they'll join, but you're 10 minutes into it. And so it's great to have someone who is either in the chat or making a comment and kind of, even if it's a little repetitive, saying something every, 5 to 10 minutes, like, for those of you who have just joined us, welcome. Zuri is currently speaking about a press release related to plastic pollution. You can view that press release here with a link to the press release. And so that's a way to just have someone who's managing the chat, checking for questions, and just ensuring that everything is going smoothly in there. Additionally, if you're having a live event with experts, whether it's a scientist or someone in academics or a government official, if you're doing a question and answer, it's always best to have someone, if you can, who's in sort of a moderator role, who is checking the chat and then asking the questions to the expert. And this helps prevent, I think we've all been on calls, whether it's ourselves or someone else, where like there's a presenter who's kind of going through and doing that, like scanning through the questions, trying to look for like, a lot of people are saying, oh, this is great, thank you, and stuff, and kind of doing that, slowing down the program. So it's great if there's someone who can, especially for a live event, kind of jump in and say, there's this question that has come through, and direct it to the person who is, it should be asked. Another advice for live events is it is critical to just help support and manage the expectation of your speakers. If you are the only person who is speaking at sort of this online event that you're having, that's great. You're good to go. If it's just you, you know what you need to do. But if you have, again, like a colleague, a scientist, a community organizer, someone from, some sort of government official, anyone who isn't directly involved with the planning of the events, it's so helpful to make sure that they are prepared and know what to expect. So obviously there are some things that you would almost always share with someone, how long you want them to speak, what the topic is going to be, whether you're using Facebook Live or YouTube or Zoom or kind of whatever the platform is. But there are some additional things that may be helpful for them. One is who is introducing them. Another one is what point during the program will they be speaking? Is it 2 minutes into the program, or is it 30 minutes into the program if you have multiple speakers who are going to be speaking? Another thing that comes up sometimes is that letting people know whether or not they're going to be on camera the entire time, or if they will only be on camera when they're speaking. Also letting people know if there will be a Q&A, kind of questions and answers at the end of the program. And I've also found it's helpful just to let people know if somebody asks a question during the Q&A and you don't know the answer to it, that's okay, and sort of what the response will be. So for instance, at the end of this program for the Q&A, if you ask a question and I don't know the answer, I'll likely end up saying, like, oh, that's a great question, I'm not sure. I will do some research, and either myself or Tiffany or Charles will get back to you and see if we can answer that question for you. And so it's nice sometimes for folks to know they don't have to have the answer to everything. They don't have to, kind of pretend that, you can post something after an event to follow up on someone's question. I've also found that when I'm hosting an event, when I'm kind of in that moderator role, before presentation starts, I'll just try and check in with the speaker and get a sense of how they're feeling. If there is time, if folks get there ahead of time, I will usually ask if they have any questions. And then also, if I get any sense that they're nervous, I will try to just, engage with them in a question or a conversation just to make them a little bit more comfortable, or just say something like, oh, I love that background you're using on Zoom. Like, oh, where is that? Or that's a beautiful plant that's behind you. Like, is that real? And just kind of help them, ask them a question, get them more comfortable. This is obviously before the program starts, but it's just a way to ensure that the folks who are speaking at the program are engaged and ready. The final recommendation for supporting and managing your speakers is to ensure they know how to transition when they're done. So when they're done with their portion of speaking, and this is kind of connects to the last bit of advice for this, is around transitions. So transitions between speakers or between parts of presentations or live social media programs that you're having can kind of at times make or break the flow of an event and how engaged everyone is. So there are a few different types of events that sometimes have multiple participants. So if you're moving from one speaker to the other, that it's just somebody speaking and talking about a press release that's coming out, or kind of a major issue that is happening in your community, and then another person from another organization is speaking about that, and it's just moving from one to the other. I have found that it's best to kind of share just some notes about, okay, like when you're done, you're going to shift to this person. Here's an introduction for that person. And that just kind of helps folks know where to go from one to the next. If there are multiple speakers and there's somebody who's in sort of a moderator role as kind of a host, I recommend that the moderator kind of create a script, actually kind of write out exactly how they want to move from one person to the other. Or for some live events that are happening on social media, sometimes it's a moderated panel where there's 4 people and they're asking questions and you're kind of bouncing back and forth. When I've been in that role as a moderator, I'm often sitting there trying to take notes to help kind of make transitions smooth. And, so you can sort of go from something like, Raul just spoke about the research on how chemicals in plastics have been linked to cancer. Annika, I know your organization used research on medical outcomes to help prevent a chemical recycling plant from opening in your city. Can you talk a bit about how you did that and how that research was helpful for you, and sort of move and transition from one topic and speaker to the other as smoothly as you can? Um, I know the transitions may seem kind of like such a small detail, but I imagine we've all been on presentations where when someone is done speaking and they don't know what to do, that there's sort of an awkward, lengthy pause, or someone is done speaking and they're just like, oh, Sharon, who's supposed to talk next? And kind of asking those questions that they don't know. And that kind of takes folks out of the event and makes them engage less within it. Which, speaking of transitions, we're going to transition to the Q&A at this point. Before we do that, I just wanted to share, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that there is a link that IPEN has for communication tools and resources that's up on the website. And we can also add anything to it if there's a specific question that comes up in the Q&A that we find a resource that would be helpful to address. We can add it to this document as well so that everyone can sort of learn from it. And then one other thing to share, just from a communications perspective, this is Charles's information. He, as Tiffany mentioned, is in another meeting. Currently, Charles is leading Thursday's media relations training. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out to him. You can also share my email address as well. You may have received it in the events. And so, yeah, with all of that said, I'm going to stop sharing and we can jump into any questions that you have.